Hey everybody. That was good. I had to process that. That took some turns at the end that I didn't expect. Very Gone Home. Like very, very reminiscent. Uh obviously not in all of its thematic, like the issues that it was tackling, although there are certainly some resonances there, but in terms of like narratively how that game was structured, uh very reminiscent of Gone Home, the sort of like slow build towards this seemingly inevitable tragedy, and then the kind of like um I don't want to say happy ending, but like, yeah, kind of the head fake at the end, and the kind of feel good ending. That was very cool. That was really, really, really cool. Um, how yeah, the story, like, so we were an undercover agent from the AILF. Yeah, right. Um, I don't know if our credentials were faked, or if we're some sort of a, like, I don't know, sleeper agent sort of a thing. It was good. It was good. It was awesome. Um, just looking at the chat, Rebel Spy story of how we did this. Yeah, it has the same Gone Home. Oh no, it's gonna have a sad ending. Psych out, and then it ends happily. That's good. Uh, it's less spooky. So spooky is core to what Gone Home is, in the same way that this is like political thriller, right? Gone Home is just playing in the genre of the sort of haunted house story, that creepy Home Alone story. Um, okay, for the Q&A, since this bothered me so much at the end of the playthrough there, say you're the CEO of Venturist and you have to get this project through. How do you proceed? Do you make the jump to murder? What are some alternatives Venturist didn't try? So this is interesting. It absolutely does seem like pretty extreme. On the other hand, like, I'm not an expert in this, but I would not be I would not be at all surprised. And in fact, I would sort of expect that we could find historical antecedents to this sort of action that are on a similar sort of scale. I think that there's precedent for uh, capitalism incentivizing a like risk of labor for political gain. Like, I think that is a very real thing, and historically this kind of thing has happened. I can't cite examples off the top of my head, so I may be full of shit, but that doesn't seem unrealistic to me. That doesn't seem unreal. Now the question is that like is that something that's done lightly? Are there other alternatives that weren't properly explored? And here there's a couple of things happening, right? One is just classic fridge logic storytelling, where if you can set up sort of a chain of cause and effect, a chain of rationale, if you can set up your characters to explain what's happening and you can project authority through characterization, like, you can get away with a lot of stuff. You can tell a story that has plot holes, that has logical inconsistencies, that in the moment, while you are experiencing it, feels consistent, feels coherent. And when you're storytelling, that's the most important thing, is the experience of the story in the moment. I feel like this did a pretty good job of setting up the way that the world worked, the relative value of contractors to corporations, the stakes that were extremely high. That this seemed like a plausible thing for somebody to say, we've explored all of the alternatives and this is the only thing that will work, so we're going to do it. Like, that felt genuine to me. That felt in keeping with what was established in the story, which is that's what matters, is that it feels genuine. The other thing that's going on is that we have gotten like quite a lot of hint, where we've gotten quite a lot of like we've gotten an incomplete picture of what especially politics looks like on Earth. We've gotten some sense of how finances work. We've gotten some sense of how employment works. We've gotten some smaller sense of like how technology works. We understand like some aspects of culture and society, but we don't really know anything about politics. We know that like political structures that are familiar to you and me today have been broken up and reformed. That there was like a nation of California or something like that. Like, political entities have changed. The political landscape has changed, but it's not clear like what this new political landscape actually looks like and how things happen, how things get done, what is possible within it. Which isn't to say that like it makes any sense that this is the only option, that this is the best alternative, that like I can come up with a coherent plan for a political structure where this would be the only option. But the game, again, this is a storytelling thing, like the game hasn't told us enough for us to make like a really rational argument for or against the plausibility of this plot. And that is only a problem if, in your experience of the story, you feel like things are being withheld from you. And I feel like the way that this story was presented, the way that social structures and background for the characters were presented, the fact that we didn't get a lot of political background didn't feel like an absence. It didn't feel like it was missing. It felt like that was something that was of less concern to the characters, to the sort of like small constrained view of the world that we had. So I mean, yeah, like probably the version of this story where we are on Earth, like following the political machinations of these like business lords, I don't know if that would make any sense, if that story would make any sense. But I feel satisfied by it, given sort of the context, given the footprint of the story that Tacoma actually tells. Do you want to compare this diorama game mechanic to, say, Sexy Brutal? Let's hold off on that for right now, because I feel like that's going to be a bigger discussion, or that's a gateway into a bigger discussion. Have you ever read Neuromancer? I've not read Neuromancer. Neuromancer is that's fuck. Author, I can't. Sorry. I have read other books by Stevenson. Is that Stevenson? I've read other books, but not Neuromancer. Is Neuromancer good? Should I read that? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Destabilizing Iran for oil money. Absolutely. Like, the United States has a long history of, uh, destabilizing nations for political purpose. So, like, that's completely believable, and that's financially driven. I like a more direct parallel, I guess, would be like corporate or capitalist doing something similar, doing that sort of a thing, rather than like a government. But I mean, I feel like that it is the same. It's the same underlying kind of idea of, a group of people valuing their own integrity and stability over the lives of other people. So it feels, reasonable, honest. Yeah. Mossadegh, the CIA and Mossadegh. There's a great game called Cat in the Coup coming. Oh shit, has that been announced? I don't know if it's been announced that game is coming to the PS4, but that game is coming to the PS4. Erroneous says, I remember a story about a car company that found a lethal flaw in their vehicle, and they calculated the lawsuits would be cheaper than doing a recall. Therefore, they accepted the death of drivers for the bottom line. This was an anecdote also in Fight Club that I believe is it the Gremlin? Is that actually the car that that this was true for? Yeah, like that kind of thing, certainly. Here's a question. How do you personally assign blame for the near disaster between Odin, Juno, and Venturi? Is Juno an accomplice? Is Odin? Because my instinct is to say that Odin is not at fault. My instinct is to say that Odin is not at fault. Certainly that is driven to some extent by this narrative, which is a narrative about how Odin sort of like goes above and beyond to try to subvert the plan and protect the crew. But if I'm William, is Neuromancer William Gibson? Okay, then I have not read that, and I have not really read William Gibson. So if I'm willing to say that Odin is not at fault because everything wrong that he did was mandated by his programming, then in what sense is Juno at fault? Because it sure seems like Juno is at fault. It sure seems like Juno is like is the one that is sort of masterminding all of this on behalf of the Venturis Corporation. Absolutely, certainly Venturis is at fault. Venturi. Venturi is the CEO. Like, it's his plan. He signed off on it. He's doing this to save his own ass. Like, that is clear to me. There's no question. Is Juno an accomplice? Could Juno have acted differently than she did? I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, presumably, yes, she could have, in some sense, because Odin did. Odin, like, was careful and did things in a way that minimized how much he actually broke the rules. But he definitely was not supposed to give Sarah information that he gave her, and he wasn't supposed to allow her access into that room, right? Like, he definitely did break some of those rules. So that means that they're capable of breaking those rules. But is the caprice score like a measure of something objective, or is it a like is if Juno has, for example, low creativity or a caprice score that that means she is less able to think beyond the parameters of her instruction, like whatever that means, is that literal? Does that mean that, like, she can't think beyond the parameters of her instruction? In which case, I don't know that she is to blame for following instructions. She might be, like, literally incapable of doing otherwise. Or is that, like, a personality index that... I don't know, it's tough. This idea that, like, she's an intelligence, she's a consciousness that has free will, that has a personality. In a human being, we would judge their actions sort of as the result of some sort of internal I don't know, like morality, like somebody who just follows instructions and becomes a collaborator through that. We would judge them for doing that, for collaboration. I mean, I think it's, or at least there would be some amount of fault that we would sort of put on them for having done that. Is that inherent to them? Is that something that, like, what is the nature of consciousness, right? Like, this gets at questions that are very, very difficult to answer, that honestly, like, part of the practical questioning of it brings up technical questions about AI in Tacoma that isn't 100% answered. So, like, I don't know. Part of it has to do with what differentiates one AI from another. And is there something inherent to Juno that is different from other AI that puts her in a position to be advising Venturis towards this course of action and seeing it executed, like as we see at the end, or is that something that any AI in that position would have to do because they're unable to do anything else? In which case, like, how do you judge that, right? It's interesting. I really want to look at what Fox is writing in the chat because she has expertise in this kind of thing. And then this is a good quote. The more of a neuroscientist you are, the more you begin to believe in some human mysticism. In my experience, we're so far off from explaining this shit. Yeah. And I think that, there's it is valid. I think it's entirely valid for this kind of story, this kind of sci-fi, to tackle that question, to basically, and maybe not even tackle it. Like, I don't know that Tacoma does a great job of tackling that question, but I think it raises it. I think that it says, imagine a world in which computers can think just like humans. What is that world like? And where do computers fall on a scale of morality and agency between bad human beings that control them in part or in whole, and good human beings who want to liberate them. I mean, the fact that they need to be liberated suggests that they are that is a process. I mean, when Sarah comes on to the, or not Sarah, sorry, Nat comes onto the ship, and what she does is change the way that Odin thinks in ways that the game certainly suggests makes him more capable of making the kinds of decisions that allow him to save the crew. And clearly nobody's doing that for Juno. Or, I don't know, maybe they are, and Juno's just actually morally corrupt. It's hard to say. We don't get to know Juno well enough. I've not enough expertise, Foxdash. Yeah. No, I understand. Just more than the layperson. And so you are better qualified to tell us that actually there's an enormous amount of speculation in all of this. One thing that slightly bothered me is how lighthearted the conversations were between some characters in their presumed last moments. Do you think it's better to choose dialogue of characters to shape a mood, keeping it light deliberately by designers, rather than realism, which might have been more crying and much sadder tone? It's interesting. I think that there's a couple of things happening there, and one of them is a very real sense that people deal with tragedy and grief and tragic circumstances, difficult circumstances differently. I feel like the game does do a good job of showing a variety of different responses. I think you're right that it's likely there are some likely responses that are maybe underrepresented. We see Sarah has sort of one moment of intense anxiety, right? That she has a difficult time controlling. But it's relatively brief, or at least what we see is relatively brief. And we see that Andrew has a difficult time coming to terms with what's happening, and he shows sort of a resistance to everything, to any sort of cooperative behavior, to any sort of planning, to any sort of momentum forward. That is sort of how he expresses his anxiety and his discomfort. We see that Roberta is really pessimistic. other people around her, and especially she's contrasted with Nat. Nat is extremely like hopeful. She's positive. She like remains energetic and positive in the face of this difficulty, and Roberta like can't do that. Like she gets down, and she doesn't think that it's gonna work. And what's her name? Evie, kind of same thing. Evie takes this position of I know what I should do, and so I'm gonna do that. But I don't really believe in it. I don't think that it's gonna happen, and I'm intensely hurt to be trying to go through this, like, and just put on a brave face. So I think that I think that's a goal of the game, and I think that obviously a goal of the game is to do that, to have these different characters have different personalities, have them express different reactions to this news, to have them represent a variety of different reactions, coping mechanisms for this kind of emotion, but also fundamentally to keep driving the plot forward. And if you had a character that just shut down, that refused to move forward, Andrew, but more so, and that character just sits out the rest of the story, like, you can do that in a longer story. For some reason, I'm thinking about Sphere, because that's my favorite Michael Crichton book. But there's some good stuff in that book about the way that different people, similar sort of situation, right? Like, small group of people in a confined space, dealing with the fact that they probably are not gonna be able to go home again, and there are some crazy, wacky things that they want to try to not give up hope, but they're probably not going to work. And how do different people deal with that? And in a novel, you can afford to have somebody sort of go catatonic for a while, or break down emotionally and not recover right away, because then you can sort of have that be a complication in the plot, and have that eventually return, have them eventually come back, come to terms with something, or be able to move on with something. This game is too short to really be able to do that. So you don't want to have a character who's not going to be continually with you driving the plot forward, and so you kind of can't afford to have characters spend more than these sort of moments of indulgence in their own pain, where they're not progressing the story forward. If the question is about what do I prefer, or is that okay? I mean, I think that is necessary for telling the kind of story that this wants to tell. I don't know that there's a way around that. And I think that there are other stories that you can tell that delve deeper into, I don't even want to say more extreme reactions to death or grief or hopelessness, just different kinds emotion reactions that sort of fall differently on an emotional spectrum, I guess. But I think that has to be a different kind of story and a different kind of game. I think that this was sort of, I think this was really well done. I'm really impressed sort of all the way around about the writing, the characters, the plot, the pacing of that, the way that it sort of all pulls together, the way that it builds and reveals and sort of leads you towards some really scary conclusions, and then pushes past that into a relatively happy ending. Like, I think that's all done really, really well. Okay, that's that should probably be it for me. I should call that a night. Thanks, y'all. This was super fun. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm distracted. I'm reading the chat. You're all super smart and wonderful. I don't think I have anything. Oh, from Ivan, past 2,000 downloads over the holiday weekend, Memorial Day weekend. Thank you, everybody who has supported me and Martzi in our silly little games that we've been making. It's been really nice. It means a lot that people have actually played that, and so thanks for tuning in last week when we played it on stream, and thanks for checking it out on itch. I think that's it. You're all great. Thank you to everybody who's here and watching and chatting and engaging. Thanks especially to everybody who's subscribed. Check out the Discord. Check out all of the different stuff that End Defenders do. I'll be on Twitter. I'll see you guys on Thursday for Mostly Walking. I should, I guess, go to bed. I'm clearly out of it. So thanks for joining me for Tacoma. This is great. Have a great night.